Welcome to the business podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. AmCham business podcasts are hosted by Dr Duff Watkins. Duff is the director of Exec Search International, an author, and is also on the AmCham Council of Governors. AmCham, bringing business to you.
Hello and welcome to the business podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. AmCham, bringing business to you. My name is Duff Watkins and I'm your host today on the AmCham Business Podcast. And our guest today is once again Hugo Llorens, US Consul General to Australia. So Hugo, welcome back.
Good to be with you, Duff.
Today we're going to we'd like an update from you, please, on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is one of the biggest trade deals in history. I think it is possibly the biggest trade deal. It involves potentially 40% of the trading nations and 50% if we include China. This has been bubbling along for half a decade, about 5 years. I know that you've got some inside information for us. So what's the latest with the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Well, certainly for my government, for the administration of President Obama, when you look at our international economic agenda, the concluding the trade partnership, Trans-Pacific Partnership
TPP.
Agreement,
We'll just call it the TPP.
Yeah, concluding the Trans-Pacific Partnership agreement is really a top priority. So, and the reasons for us are obvious. I mean, you mentioned that it's taken 5 years to negotiate. I mean, this is a very broad and deep trade agreement, and it would be a state-of-the-art trade agreement. It would be very much a 21st century trade agreement. It's not your traditional sort of just standard market access agreement, although that's all on the table. So, yeah, to give the background, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're talking about 12 nations from the Pacific region, and that includes nations from Asia, including obviously Australia, nations in the American continent who are Pacific, who are on the Pacific Rim, and that includes, the United States, Canada, Chile, Peru. So it is really a major regional agreement, and these countries do constitute 40% of the world's gross domestic product, and that's a huge amount of economy. And you're talking about countries that account for about 35% of global international trade. So obviously, for us, it's a no-brainer. I mean, the United States, and very much President Obama, his announced policy in the region is what he calls the rebalance. And it's the fact that, the Asia-Pacific region is becoming the hub, the global engine for growth. We have seen that in the last 30 years with the emergence of Asia as the premier economic region of the world. So we need to tap into that. All of us need to tap into that, and we need to find win-win solutions so you create more growth and prosperity. So the TPP is a really valuable tool for all of us, because I talk about win-win. It's a very good tool for all of us to get there.
You mentioned the complexity of, just to give the listeners an idea, Australia sends 22 people to negotiations. Japan sends 120. The U.S. takes 80 specialists to each negotiation. That's how complex and how big a deal it is. So I guess when you're saying it's a state-of-the-art, platinum standard, never been done before, we're actually talking about pioneering an agreement. This is
that's what I mean. I mean, it is a state-of-the-art agreement, and by that it means that you have you're negotiating these 12 countries. You're negotiating normal market access. You're negotiating tariffs for a whole range of goods, always sensitive goods like agriculture, you have textiles. Yeah. So everything is on the table. And the result of that agreement is that it'll increase everyone's market access. So everyone will benefit. We'll have more economic interaction between these countries that represent a significant part of the global economy. But what's more, there's so many more aspects to it. We are talking about regulatory standards. Behind just the normal cross-border of trade, there are all sorts of regulatory elements that impede competition, that impede businesses from actually selling the goods. It can be anything from health and safety standards, which are all good, but when they're duplicative, they are anti-business, and it's hard for you to sell a product if you're dealing with 10 different sets of rules on safety. So we're negotiating, establishing some common safety and health standards, very high standards, but in a way that facilitates the ability of people to do business cross-border. I mean, we're talking about one of the problems that our businesses have, Australian businesses, American businesses, is the fact that when you're talking about competing against state-owned enterprises, these enterprises have a whole set of competitive advantages. One of the things we're negotiating a set of rules that would make a compatible level playing field between state-owned enterprises and private companies, and that is a good thing. That's a great thing for all. I could just think any member of your chamber here, that would be of great benefit. We're talking about, when I talk about state of the art, we are talking about issues like intellectual property rights. Look, at the end of the day, the ability to sustain long-term investments, the ability to innovate, to create new products, new ideas, new ways of doing things, it requires people to have a respect for their intellectual property. I mean, one of the keys that has made America arguably the most innovative economy in the world is the fact that we have very strong IPR protection for our investors and our inventors, and that is on the table in the TPP. So we are negotiating very robust intellectual property standards. There are environmental issues. We have an obligation. I mean, we all want growth. We want that. What we're expecting. Again, talking about the economic side, is again. Let me give you hard dollars. I mean, you're talking about those 12 countries I'm talking about. When I talk about 40% of global GDP, we're talking about $30 trillion economies. But these are very rapidly growing economies. You're talking about 800 million consumers that would be involved as members of the TPP. So when you look at just Australia, the wealth of Australia is obvious. The ability of that you have trade facilitation within this great country is good for business. It's good for prosperity, creates lots of jobs. If you can do this on a not just a bilateral, we have an excellent free trade agreement between the United States and Australia that has benefited both countries. But if you look at being able to do that at a regional level with many different countries, I mean, I think it will be something that will be historic. It is not a closed agreement. The idea is not to exclude anyone. President Obama, all of the TPP country leaders have made clear that it's open for other countries. I know South Korea, Republic of Korea, is seriously considering coming into TPP. There's always the question of China. Yeah. Hey, our view is that we would welcome China participation in TPP. However, remember, the standards are very high. So, the countries that do want to enter into the TPP need to maintain very high standards on things like state-owned enterprises, cutting edge in intellectual property, cutting edge in terms of competition policy, regulatory compatibility. So that is, but again, it is very much all in. We very much want the TPP, once the agreement is concluded, that it will grow. And I think that when you look at the situation I look at the situation in Australia where there is an issue of business confidence. Same thing as in the United States. I mean, there are difficulties in the global economy. We have seen commodity prices decline considerably. We have seen slowing economic growth rates in many key countries. You look at the situation in the European Union, it's a complicated situation. Well, the way governments can help create an environment where you can sort of kickstart growth is giving it more of an opportunity for companies to be able to compete, to sell products, to do cross-border business. And I think that, the TPP, from a business confidence standpoint, let's forget about the dollars and cents of what it will mean in terms of having that market access. But the fact that governments can actually, the bureaucracies can come together, 12 countries, very different cultures, and we can all come and say, we believe in free trade. We believe in having closer trade and investment ties. that is a huge message to Australian business, to American business, to Vietnamese businesses, and it'll be good for the whole region. So
okay, so part of the deal, which is why it's taking so long, is because the complexity of it, trying to get all these countries. I mean, for example, trying to work out the rules between the legislative rules and requirements between, say, pharmaceutical rights, between copyright laws. I mean, that's really hard to do. So that would explain it. But the other obstacle that you have is not everyone is persuaded that this will be uniformly beneficial. I mean, there are critics out there to the TPP. What's the what are your comments about that? You've heard the comments from critics who say that it really won't benefit the U.S. It really won't help manufacturing. It just endorses the lower standards. And by the way, you're quite right. In Australia, for example, we, speaking as an Australian citizen, tend to observe standards in Europe or the U.S. and take whatever the highest, most stringent is and adopt it as Australian law. So the whole idea, and I think as you rightly point out, of the TPP, you're not trying to find the lowest common denominator. You're trying to find the one that works for everyone.
Look, I think for the U.S., we have lost many business opportunities around the world, including in the Asia Pacific region, because of the lack of regulatory transparency, because of policies that are anti-competition, and so there are so many elements to economic trade regimes that are not, again, it's just not just the level of tariffs that impede business, that basically my government and I think the U.S. business across the board, I mean, you just have to look at the positions of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, at the national level in terms of their testimony on the Hill in our Congress. They all know how much business is lost because of the lack of transparency in regulatory regimes that go beyond, like I said, tariffs. So what the U.S. is saying is, yes, we're willing to give other countries increased market access to the United States, but in return for movement on other things, I mean, including on areas that we're very interested in. I mean, when you look at what are the two big economies, when you talk about hardcore market access, I mean, you're talking about the U.S. and Japanese economies, the first and third largest economies in the world. And we've got everything from, automobiles to, to agricultural products, rice, everything's on the table. So the market access piece is very important with very advanced economies like the U.S., the Australian, Canadian, the Japanese. But when you're looking at some of the developing countries, they recognize that if they're going to go, you can stay in that middle income trap, in that glass ceiling forever, or you can actually make the bold decisions and say, look, we want to be able to be in the big leagues. We want to be able to compete fairly. And so this is what I talk about win-win. I think this will be good for U.S. business. Will it be good for businesses in some of the less developed countries? Absolutely. So I think the idea is everyone will win. Let me just mention something else. I mean, it's again, we live in a world where being good in business also means you being a good corporate citizen. So I think the social responsibility of the private sector is an important part of what we all want. We're all citizens of our countries and of this world. So one of the things that I find fascinating about TPP is that you have an environmental chapter, and you say, well, what? Well, the environmental chapter is a good one. Let me give you one example of the kinds of things we're negotiating. We have a problem around the world of the trafficking of endangered species. We know about the trafficking of ivory. We are losing species every day, and this makes our planet that much poorer and that much unhealthier. So one of the things that's being negotiated is that the TPP countries will work together to combat. So if the U.S. has a law that prohibits ivory trade, and it is and through another TPP country that ivory is coming through, we will mutually recognize our own environmental legislation, our own conservation legislation, so we can, as good international citizens, combat a problem like that.
So it's not just about the money; it's about the sustainable business and also the as you're saying, the environmental aspects.
It is about the 21st century. It is about we all want to make good money. We all want to grow our businesses. We all want to grow our economies. But within that, there's an important social responsibility, which will actually make us all better off. And the other thing I mentioned is on the labor side. There is a labor chapter to TPP. Again, when I talk about a 21st century agreement, that it's important because, we don't, the issues like child labor.
Yeah.
If you're going to have a trade agreement with the United States, a free trade agreement with the United States, in the 21st century we live in, people have to abide by rules. We all have an obligation to treat our workers right, something we passionately believe in the United States and Australia. So this is a positive development. It's going to make us all more committed to sharing some common values. So we're going to be long-term and successful economic partners. And we're looking 25, 50, 100 years down the line, how we can make a better, more prosperous and a better quality of life for all of the citizens of the Asia-Pacific. Issues like labor standards are important, environmental standards, as well as market access, intellectual property rights, and everything else.
Well, from what I can tell, the beneficiaries of the TPP, the most obvious ones, will be the smaller nations, as you've mentioned, because they sort of have the most to gain and perhaps the least to lose. Most of the objections and the comments, from what I gather, seem to be about whether the U.S. will actually profit from the TPP. For example, I hear a lot, or read a lot, that the manufacturing in the U.S. has not been, the TPP won't help manufacturers in the U.S. because a lot of manufacturing will essentially be farmed out to cheaper sites, cheaper countries such as, stay with China, for example. What are you hearing about that?
Well, again, no, I don't agree with that at all. Look, the United States already has free trade agreements with a number of countries that are in the TPP area, including Mexico, including Chile. So we have agreements with countries that would be relatively inexpensive labor. We would argue that those arrangements have benefited everyone. I mean, what I see is American manufacturing is on a growth path. Why? Because we're becoming our manufacturing sector right now is becoming more and more efficient, more productive for every labor unit of labor that we use. Number one. Number two, because of energy. I mean, the United States is at the cusp of an energy revolution, thanks to the revolutionary technologies developed in shale gas, thanks to renewable energy. I mean, today in America right now, you can get solar power at the household level that is comparable with hydrocarbons fired plants, and this energy is just going to get cheaper. I mean, the technology is going to get better. You're getting economies of scale. So what we're seeing in America right now is a real growth in manufacturing, and that's a long-term trend. There are all sorts of structural issues in some of the countries you talked about, including China, where labor costs are growing considerably. So America represents, America last year was the favored haven for foreign investment. There was more foreign investment in the U.S. economy than any economy, bar none, including China and India and Europe and everyone else. And because the U.S. brings to the table those key elements: rule of law, property rights, both physical and intellectual, a very open, transparent judicial system. Those are the things. Those are the secrets to America's economic success. They're the secrets to Australia's economic success. I mean, your success is not about just having a pile of iron ore or coal. I mean, I've been traveling around the world for 35 years, and I have, served in countries that are a lot richer than Australia, believe it or not, in resources, and are miserably poor. Australia is a rich country, ultimately, because it has that rule of law. It has property rights. It has a great education system. So those are the values. So when I go back, I say is that what the U.S. is committed to within the context of TPP is that people buy in to this idea that you have to have higher standards all the way around. You have to protect property. You have to allow for equal competition between private companies and state-owned enterprises. You have to create common regulatory systems on safety and health and so on that will not impede business. If you do that, there is no doubt. I mean, look, U.S. economic, if you just go back in the last 10 years, U.S. trade with the Asian Pacific nations have increased dramatically, and more, the Asia Pacific is becoming the principal trade and investment partners to the U.S. So when we talk about American exports, you have millions and millions of American manufacturing jobs right now that are directly related to exports to the region. And my view is that the TPP, if you look at what's being negotiated, will give us only more market access and will give us more trade. But again, trade is not just goods, it's services as well.
Now, let me cast your mind back. When we first met a couple years ago, Hugo, I think one of the first things you said to me is, "Hey, Duff, I've only been in this country a few hours, but how come nobody's talking about the TPP? This is the biggest deal ever." And I said, well, maybe it hasn't been marketed properly, or maybe we don't understand it. But that was a couple of years ago now, and it has gotten a lot more press. So what's your feeling now, Hugo? What's the vibe like when you're out there talking to the politicians and the business people? Are we getting closer to getting a deal done?
Look, I think there's no question that the government of Prime Minister Abbott is very committed to concluding the TPP this year. And again, it's the same logic that applies, I think, for the United States, applies to Australia. The reason is this: you are a 21st century economy. You're one of the most advanced economies in the world. When you look at all of the systems you have, regulatory, trade, pricing regimes, you're at that cutting edge. So what you're looking for is that compatibility. You want your trading partners, the people you have that economic relationship, to raise their standards. And as you do that, it is going to improve Australian businesses' ability to trade and invest in the region. So in my view, it's a no-brainer. And certainly Minister Robb has been a leader. And Australia's leadership in TPP matters a lot. The one point I would make is that I agree with you. I mean, there's not enough buzz about TPP when it's something that ultimately will help define the economic architecture for all of us for the next 50 years. So there is a need. I think you can't just leave it to the government. I think it's very important for the private sector to be out there and be very clear that they support having a trade agreement that will lead to more business opportunities for Australians. So, I'll be watching for that. That's one of the reasons why I'm here today. I know that the AmCham has been a big proponent. By that, I'm talking about our Australian firms who are members and American firms. They get it. They want to be given a chance to compete. That's what everybody wants. And so I think it's a good thing. I think we're going to get there. We have a negotiating session. I think it's March 9 through the 15th in Hawaii. This will be a critical negotiating session. Of course.
Well, and it is critical because, as I understand it, if the deal does not get done this year, 2015, then it won't be for a while. It won't even be eligible to be discussed until 2017. Is that correct?
Well, look, I'm not sure about that, but what I would say is it's certainly the objective of the TPP members. And as you know, during the APEC summit, the
here
leaders,
in Australia?
No, in China, the APEC leaders, the TPP members who were at the APEC meeting, and I believe they were all of them because all of the TPP are all APEC members.
Yes.
They all issued a communique on the margins of APEC, the TPP countries, that they felt that they were at a point that they were close, and that the objective was to close the agreement this coming year. So we are at that point where we're down to the last few yards. Now, we all know the reality is exactly
anything can happen.
The final 2 yards of the trade agreement, because people are holding on to to those last. You're waiting for the other guy to blink. That's normal in every trade negotiation. I think the difference here is I think the will is there to do it. The will, losing the opportunity.
What's the sticking point?
I don't think it's an alternative.
Can you say? I mean, are you able to?
I can't get into the look. I am not privy to all of the details. That for a successful trade negotiation, you really need to have that confidentiality. However, when people talk about this is all done in secret, pretty much we could go by category, and it's pretty transparent what the objectives are. We can talk about competition policy. We can basically say, okay, what are you trying to achieve? We're talking about procurement. What are you working on procurement? What are the kinds of standards, high standards we're looking at? It's all pretty common sense. There isn't any great rocket formula here. But what I would say is that when you get to the end point, particularly you go back to the traditional stuff, you go back to a lot of the market access stuff, and you're actually talking about specific products and so on.
Like sugar.
Absolutely.
Sugar's a big one.
Absolutely. And these things will go down, will go down to the wire. But again, at the end of the day, you got to think strategically. At the margin, not everyone in a trade deal is going to get everything they want. That's the idea of negotiation. And we're all going to negotiate. We'll all have to give some things up. But we'll gain, collectively we'll gain, and individually we'll gain a lot more. So again, my hope is that we are months from closing this agreement, and my hope is that, the president, as he has been, he's been working with Congress, and his expectation is to be able to get trade promotion authority from our Congress that would allow for this agreement, if it's concluded, so he can cleanly take it to our Congress, and the Congress can do a yes or no vote. That is their final call.
Well, which takes us into politics. I know President Obama has a lot invested in this. He's very much in favor of the Congress that he's dealing with. However, may not be so similarly inclined. So, do you have any feelings about that? Let's say it gets approved. It goes to President Obama. He takes it. He sends it to Congress. Then what?
Well, look, I think that there is strong sentiment, I think, in our Congress, in our Senate, that would support right now. That would support
bipartisan support for this. You reckon?
Yeah. You have one party. I think there's more support within the Republican Party than within the president's own party. And it's our job in the administration to deliver as many Democrats and obviously stay in very close touch, and we're in constant consultation. Again, it's the same thing that your government does here in Canberra, which is continuously the government is consulting with Congress, with Parliament, keeping them informed, keeping the government informed of how the negotiations are going, so that there are no great surprises. So my expectation is that agreement comes in. If the president gets that trade promotion authority, then you can get a vote. And we feel good that we have a chance of getting a vote this year, and move this historic agreement forward, which again would be something that will be not only good for the United States and the 12 countries, but ultimately, when you're looking at the long-term future of this region, we all have a huge stake in the Pacific.
This is what I'm taking.
It'll be good for everyone, including China. It will be good for India. It will be good for everyone. And again, that door is open. People want to come in. They are committed to more transparent, more competitive economic systems. They believe passionately in two-way trade, two-way investment, that no country can go it alone. And that TPP will be the anchor, I think, for a future generations of prosperity. So we are at a critical moment. I'm an optimist, knock on wood. I think we really do have a chance. I think that, the key players, Japan is very important in this. Obviously, my government, support from Australia. Again, Australia is a trading nation, bar none. And Australia is going to be there, and the other members will ultimately close. And I think we're going to have a good outcome. I've got that confidence.
What I'm taking away from our conversation today, Hugo, is that this Trans-Pacific Partnership, it is as big as it is almost a recasting of trade as we know it on the highest, most strategic level. At the same time, it's as mundane as the sugar on your table, because sugar would be one of the issues. It's broad. It's not just economic. It's environmental. It's social. It's about the future, but it's here and now as well. I guess that what's is making it such an exciting thing.
I think it is exciting, and I wish, again, going back, the buzz. Hope that the work that you're doing all in the American Chamber here to just get the word out. There's nothing wrong with healthy discussion and debate about trade issues. Australia is one of the world's great democracies. People are out there giving their view, and that's all to the good. You put more and more light on it. I'll give you a little, anecdote. I remember, go back 20 years ago when we were negotiating the free trade agreement with Canada, which is particularly sensitive because it's a country that's right next door. We share a 4,000-mile border, and that was probably the debate of the generation for Canada. People were afraid. What does it mean? This trade agreements and all the scare stories are out there. Well, and people in the labor movement had concerns. And if you went up and down Canada, it was really split the country down the middle. If you and I took a trip to Canada and traveled from Vancouver, where I was Consul General, to the Maritimes, you're not going to find anyone that has questioned why. Because what that FTA, like the one we have with Australia, it's a very high standard agreement. Well, this is even more. This is in that same direction. It is playing to our strengths. It is playing to trade regimes that are governed well, that are governed transparently, that really believe in that in real competition, that doesn't give unfair advantages to people. So again, I think for Australia, that debate will be a healthy one. But I'm very confident at the end of the day, Australia is a country that's always looking to move forward, and it'll be a great thing for Australia.
I remember the free trade agreement with the U.S. It was a politically contentious issue at the time. I haven't heard anything about it ever since then. But let me ask you, it sounds to me like these free trade agreements, they're getting essentially of higher quality, improving each and every time we do something like this. You've got experience. Am I picking that up correctly?
Look, it's really important to that, and that's why in an ideal world, what you want to be able to do is have the highest possible trade and investment standards at a multilateral level. So the ideal is the WTO, and we have been working on the latest, the Doha round for a very long time, and we haven't been able to close it because it's hard. The more countries you have, the multiples, the more complicated it gets, and that's why TPP is also strategic from that global perspective, because it's a big enough chunk of the global economy, but with a small number of countries where you can create that standard, and as you prove that TPP works for everyone, that it is a win-win economic solution for all the members, that will tend to spread. And it may help us in terms of what it's always our top priority, which is to be able to move this at a global level with all the members of the WTO. So that I look at it, I see it more as a long term, that people may, in the end of the day, but the impact of the TPP will be felt, I believe, in the longer term with WTO.
You've been listening to the Business Podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. Our guest today has been the United States Consul General to Australia, Hugo Llorens, who has been updating us and informing us about the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
You've been listening to the Business Podcast of the American Chamber of Commerce in Australia. This podcast is supported by Lenovo and VML. Lenovo is one of the world's leading personal technology companies, producing innovative PCs and mobile internet devices. Lenovo, for those who do. VML is a full-service digital marketing agency that can take you where you want to go. Everything we are is in everything we do. This is